all about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga, please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose a big close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bought your great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. And tonight we are talking about the Latin American Pink Tide movement, or leftist revolution, that has happened in recent years. And in what we've seen the attempts against it in the recent coups and different measures taken by Western forces against certain governments, such as the government of Venezuela, government of Brazil, now that's been ousted, and the government of Argentina that's now been ousted, and multiple other governments. And the Argentine government was ousted by an election, I should note, but still, Kirchner is no longer there. So we've had these massive changes all within a few years, and it's something to be very fishy about all of it. And you start to see these fingerprints that seem to be pretty foreign and are not really these grassroots movements that they seem to be. And being those grassroots movements, I'm talking about the these grassroots movements, or these protests that happen in Venezuela supposedly, and supposedly what we're being told on Western media is that the people have just decided to take to the street. They're fed up with their government. They're fed up with they're telling us that they're starving or whatnot. But then you see that a lot of these claims did not be true, and you start to see that these are more of along the lines of organized protests paid by and you have ultimately paid provocateurs in order to instigate these protests instead of Venezuela. And then you have in Argentina, you have a election that ultimately lands this man that's kind of championed himself as being against the so-called anti-democratic government of the Kirchners, ends up being the same dictator that he claims that the Kirchners were, being Nestor and Christina Kirchner, and he's the one that's actually taking measures to eliminate media that's not positive to him. He's actually taking measures to really crack down inside the country. Now he's been there over a year, and Argentina has quickly slipped very quickly towards the same spot they were economically in the late 90s, going towards the 2000s, or the same economic policies that led to the financial disaster. And you have the same type of government that they had back in the 80s, with the military dictatorship. Mauricio Macri is acting more like a military dictator than he is of a democratically elected president. And Mauricio Macri has ultimately angered a lot of Argentine people. So I think that potentially the possibility of him being overthrown via protest or people demanding it will officially, it could have happened. because he's so unpopular right now. Lula and his government, and later Dilma Rousseff, were overthrown in a parliamentary coup recently in September of this year, which now that Dilma Rousseff is gone, it's left with Temer, her former vice president, that ultimately ends up switching sides and becoming part of the opposition, and has now talked about cozying back up with Israel, Britain, and other Western countries, and practically a complete change in the foreign policy compared to the former foreign policy where they were talking about becoming part of BRICS, and also were taking a very strong stance against the United States. Now Temer has a much different stance about the United States, and you have also, the recent changes of governments in Peru. You have also what happened in Paraguay a few years back with the parliamentary coup that happened there in 2012 that eliminated Lugo to power and brought back the Colorado Party that had been charged for 60-something years prior to Lugo's arrival to power, and was the one that had Alfredo Stroessner, fascist dictator supported by the United States, was in the Colorado Party in Paraguay for 35 years. He ruled the country, Alfredo Stroessner, with actually a lot of connections outside the country when it came to his background. It was odd thing is that he became the dictator of that country for so long. In Peru, now you have the return to the kind of system that they had under Fujimori, the dictator prior to 2000. Now, yeah, the person that won actually ran against Fujimori's daughter, however, campaigned on pretty much the same kind of policies that Fujimori was for when it comes to neoliberalism, the same kind of globalization that Fujimori and these other, South American oligarchs that used to run this continent for so many years, and now we're kind of becoming a thing of the past with the Pink Tide revolution and the move towards the left for the entire continent, where at one point it was just, I think, Paraguay, or no, it was just, at one point it was just Peru and Colombia, I think, were the only ones that were outside of it at one point. And then Humala took power, and actually it was, for a while, so it was like Colombia and Chile. Chile did not become part of it until 2013. Bachelet took power, but she's kind of more moderate. She's not, like a radical Chavista or anything like that, but she does align herself more with the countries in the region compared to the United States or any kind of foreign power or foreign Western power. A lot of these countries seem to have very, very good relations with countries such as Iran or Russia, but when it comes to countries like Britain, United States, of course, the ones that are controlled by the bankers, they don't have very good relations with. And it's obvious why. Is that they don't want to cozy up with that circle of power. And that circle of power that I talk about when it comes to the New World Order, that's what I'm talking about when talk about these countries. These countries are part of the New World Order. When it comes to UK, United States, Canada, and many others that, unfortunately, these countries have became became hijacked by foreign forces that now, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and many other banker families that are involved with the New World Order. But the Rothschilds seem to be at the top of it because they are the ones that ultimately have the control the central banks and the control, as they say, when you control a country's currency, who really cares who controls their money? Because at that point, you pretty much do control the country. And you have the Rockefellers that are known for controlling people's oil. So now you have the source of their energy and their system of barter, that they can control those two things, then they have a pretty good grasp on a country. And, and when you think about it, what a currency is, it's kind of weird. It just really is just barter. It's just something that you barter with. However, it doesn't have any real value, currency, compared to money. The legal definition of money is a metal of intrinsic value or something that's backed by metal intrinsic value. Currency is just the value is defined by the owner of the currency. In this case, the Rothschilds or whatever bankers. They're behind the different country central banks. You know, the Federal Reserve, it's a few families, and the Rothschilds are at the top of it. And that's what makes their dollar. And it's also the value is determined by what it's traded in, the commodities it's traded in. So the petrodollar has became a nickname for the dollar. It just means, because it means that the oil is a commodity. It's often traded. The dollars often are one of the commodities that the dollars often traded in is oil. So it's that's how the dollar still has quite a bit of power, because of the trade of oil and dollars. However, that's starting to go away, and now you're starting to see the petrodollar start to unravel, and now we're starting to have some problems in like the allied countries. Seems like the United States. We're having Canada. We had recent problems with inflation. Colombia, recent problems with inflation. Mexico, problems with inflation. Ukraine, a problem with inflation. There seems to be like a economic crisis building up in the countries that are in the America circle, however, are not, but not in America itself. In fact, America, the economic indicators from a surface view seem to be actually doing very well. We have the Dow way up. We have unemployment not as bad as it was in the 2010, during the height of the recession. However, now you have this instability, though. If you look a little bit deeper, you start to realize that it's a fragile system, and it's ultimately a pyramid scheme. That's what this whole economic system really is. And you have, and the thing is, you have the people believing that the next guy is going to make some major changes. And it's not true, that Donald Trump is going to make some major changes when he gets to the presidency, and that he's going to fight the Rothschilds or something like that. There's some people that actually believe that. And they don't realize that Donald Trump ultimately can be bought, and also can be they can put the fear into him and tell him that if he doesn't follow the line, he will be assassinated. Simple as that. Because Donald Trump is not JFK or something like that. I don't think that Donald Trump is someone with the same, that has these ideas like JFK did. And also, when you hear what Donald Trump has to say, you hear his extreme support for the Zionist Israel. You hear the man's pretty much deferring the problems of America, not onto the bankers, but talking about the problems of America. When I talk about defer, he's deferring when telling Americans about who's responsible for the problems. He's deferring the problems. He's deferring the problems from the bankers to minorities in this country, the Hispanics, and he's trying to make it seem like that the immigrants in this country, or illegal immigrants, are causing the problems in this country. But also, illegal immigration is practically a concept that is mainly created from corporations. Corporations love illegal immigration because it's a way of being able to pay workers less than minimum wage. So corporations, they don't mind it. So the people that have a lot of the say-so when it comes to the government like the illegal immigration. So it's going to continue. And the wall ain't going to do anything really to stop illegal immigration. In fact, a lot of illegal immigrants come by plane. And another thing is that even the ones that come across the border, it's easily defeatable. The wall is really outdated. I don't know if it's outdated. It's just a flimsy concept. There's so many things that ultimately it can be surpassed, and with tunneling and many other systems of crossing the border, even going over in a hot air balloon, I could think could be an option. Scaling it or just breaking it down. I mean, what's the thing going to be made out of? Titanium? So I feel like it could definitely be. There's so many ways that people can get across it. I mean, I just laid like 4 right there. You could tunnel, you could hot air balloon, scale it, or break through it. And what is it going to take in order to keep this wall secure? Are we going to have some giant security force? Are we going to have to put tons of troops on it, like the Berlin Wall. The whole wall concept. It actually, it actually got to a lot of Americans. They actually believed about building this wall, and they chanted it at his rallies. And it's part of the whole energy of its pitch, is that he can have people, shouting for these outrageous solutions, not even realizing how these solutions are not going to work, and not looking towards the real problems of why illegal immigration continues, or why do we have terrorism. Is that Donald Trump seems like we will be able to eliminate terrorism by stopping Muslims from coming to the United States. Well, the thing is that if the United States government stopped financing terrorism, stop financing the Free Syrian Army, stop financing al-Nusra, and also stop financing countries that finance terrorism, such as Qatar, Turkey, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and also stopped funding Israel, who funds terrorism inside of Syria, and also started and took an active step to eliminate terrorism by siding with Russia inside of Syria and helping Russia defeat ISIS, like they actually are legitimately doing, bombing ISIS, and aligning ourselves with Iran and working with Hezbollah and other forces that have been very effective in fighting terrorism in the Middle East, then we could actually do a serious thing against terrorism. But however, with our current, he's talking about our foreign policy of, even adding support to Israel, giving Israel even more support than they already have currently. It's incoherent, because Israel has been one of the biggest aiders to terrorism inside Syria with the Free Syrian Army, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, all these different groups in the opposition, and ISIS, which even has, there's the alternative name, Israeli Secret Intelligence Services. It's not far-fetched to think that Israel has made ISIS to fight countries that oppose Zionism. And I'm not saying that they did it all by themselves, but I'm saying that they definitely helped. They've helped the army. They've helped the army, and they've also put some of their own people in there. I mean, these people in ISIS, they are masked for a reason. And it's not because of some. It's not because just because it looks stylish. It's because they're concealing their identities. These people are white, European, Israeli, and a lot of them are not Arab. They're not Iranian. They are they're Western. And if people were to see the Western side of terrorism and how all terrorism practically inside the Middle East, and I'll say almost all of it, has a root from the United States, UK, Israel, one of the three countries, US, UK, or Israel, and that ultimately that the parent organization of practically a lot of modern terrorism, the Mujahideen, was created or was heavily strengthened by the United States government, and that if we never gave them the Stinger missiles way back then they would have never been the same organization that they were later, and then later they split up in Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and so many other different organizations. If that never happened, who knows what the Middle East would look like today. And also that the fact is that Wahhabism, the founding ideology to terrorism, is a UK invention in order to destabilize the Islamic world. And that's only really in the last 100 years all this happened. The Mujahideen was only about 40 years ago. So really most of the whole Middle East being engulfed with this chaos was a practically newer recent thing. Israel, with Israel's entrance into the Middle East, and when they usurped the land from the Palestinians, that was also another major step forward towards creating more chaos in the Middle East. And you saw after that, you saw that a lot more wars, and the chaos definitely went up in the Middle East after Israel's founding in 1947. So Israel's, with their 7 decades of terror that they've inflicted on the Palestinians, have also had a ripple effect, the 7 decades of terror on other countries. And, they've even had at times where they bombed other countries like they did in Egypt in 1967, They've been doing in Syria as of recently, and they've been doing it using their proxies many, many times. They have the South Lebanon Army doing their bidding inside of Lebanon. They have the Free Syrian Army inside of Syria. They have, in more clandestine, they have ISIS across the Middle East. They have Al Qaeda across the Middle East. These, again, all Israeli-backed groups in reality. Even though that if you look at a surface level, of course, you're just going to see that these are Islamic extremist groups, and you think that they would have no interest in supporting a Jewish state. However, is that these countries serve the secretive agenda of the Mossad, and the Mossad, this is the way they operate, is that to a lot of the public, they have no clue what they do, and they have no idea that they're involved with so many terror events. They've been involved with 9/11. They were involved in the 94 bomb in Argentina. They were involved in a wide scope of events across the world. They were probably involved in 11, 13, 15 inside of Paris. They've been involved with so many false flags and different terror attacks across the world. And I'm sure that there was probably, some of these other ones that have happened, with like there was the Belgium one, there's been the German one recently, some of these other terror events that there definitely was some Mossad fingerprint somewhere. At the very minimum, you have to realize there's Mossad fingerprint just by the fact that because these groups even exist. Even if it was an ISIS operative that did it with no intelligence gathering or whatnot from Mossad, is that they still exist partially because the Israel trains them, and they've been caught on video training them inside of Syria. Well, anyways, we're going on in this show right now, and I think it's very obvious. Anyone's been paying attention to Syria, and you see that this extreme amount of defense for these head choppers, these terrorists inside of Syria, that something obviously is weird, and then they tried, but the media goes so far to say that, that didn't happen, that's propaganda or whatever from Assad. There's so much evidence, but of course that they want their Operation Syria to succeed so badly, and it hasn't worked the way that they want to. The way they would probably want it is that the proxies eliminate the Assad military, the proxy takes over, the Free Syrian Army, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, take over the country, and then they pretty much just transform into like a country like Saudi Arabia. It's like a theocracy that is Western backed, and of course there would be a lot of human rights violations that they would cover up. There would be executions that wouldn't be reported in the Western media, and that's what Syria would turn into if the Free Syrian Army was to take power. But it doesn't look like the Free Syrian Army is going to take power in the immediate future. I do worry about down the road because the United States military could get involved and actually do some kind of invasion. But right now with they're not going to get. It doesn't look like they're going to get involved in the next few weeks, and the Free Syrian Army does not look like they're anywhere near victory. In fact, they're near what looks to be total defeat. As apparently a lot of the Free Syrian Army are surrendering to Russia, and a lot of the militants are laying down their arms. Aleppo's been liberated. You have Damascus is still totally liberated. They have at one point the Syrian Arab Army has liberated Palmyra, but it fell back into ISIS. And now potentially next is Raqqa. Raqqa might be the next city to do major operation and liberate, and that would end. ISIS's so-called capital is Raqqa. So if Raqqa is liberated, just about game over for the opposition inside of Syria. And one thing you need to keep in mind is that yes, the Free Syrian Army and ISIS are on the same side of the war. They're not fighting each other. And they almost try to make it seem like with Western media that the Free Syrian Army is fighting ISIS more heavily than the Syrian Arab Army. The Syrian Arab Army has been the ones that have been fighting ISIS. The Free Syrian Army and ISIS have had a ceasefire, and the rebels and ISIS are one and the same. There's these people, these bloggers, that they put the most biggest bullshit that you'll ever see about the Syrian war. And if you rely on Twitter bloggers for your news about the Syrian war, if you rely on bloggers for your news about the Syrian war, you're going to be heavily misled. Because they're going to tell you, one huge lie I've seen, and it came from the moral, they know that a lot of people do not like Israel, so they try to appeal to some people by trying to make it seem like that the Palestinians' resistance and the Syrian terrorists somehow are equal their fight, when it's of course bullshit. I've seen this before. I've seen that they try to say that Assad is somehow a Zionist, and that somehow, even though they spend an entire career of being against Israel and he's opposed Zionism every step of the way, they've tried to make it seem like that. Obviously, he's not pro-Israel. Obviously, he doesn't do the bidding of the bankers. But according to these different bloggers, which they've got their expertise from never going to Syria, never talking to real Syrians, or if they do talk to Syrians, then they're talking to Wahhabis, or they're ignoring the ones that are telling them the truth. That's also no possibility. But these bloggers also that rely mainly on CNN or Fox News, for their coverage on the Syrian war, which this heavily biased coverage that we've seen is some of the worst reporting that might be that Americans have seen in their history. Americans, it's some of these lies about like the Aleppo. It's almost as bad as Saddam's WMD's lie. And in a way, it's actually to a whole new level, because it would be like saying instead of Saddam, or it would be like saying that Saddam had the WMDs when at the same time the Kurdish actually had WMDs, which it didn't. But that's what you're telling them, that with Aleppo, you're saying that Assad is responsible for the massacres that happened instead of Aleppo, when the rebels are actually responsible for that. So, it's not like they vilified a person that's not to be vilified. Saddam was a little bit different, because Saddam was somebody that could be vilified because he was a villain to a lot of people and did a lot of horrible human rights abuses. There's no question about that. However, Assad, it's a lie. Assad is not Saddam Hussein, and that's probably what they're going to eventually try to paint this out. This war that's coming up as a humanitarian mission similar to the one of Iraq, of eliminating a dictator like Saddam. But of course, this is not even close to comparable. Another thing is that Saddam was backed by the United States. Assad never enjoyed United States backing. He actually stood against the Iraq invasion, despite his own personal opposition to Saddam Hussein. At least in the past, I think he always opposed Saddam Hussein. Despite that, he ended up backing. He backed the Iraqi people against the United States invasion. Those became the ultimate losers in the war. Is that they ended up 1.8 million of them were killed. The ultimate winners of the war were the bankers, the defensive subcontractors, but the bankers ultimately it ended up turning on them a little bit, didn't it? Because ultimately, in the end, the Shia taking charge of the country led to Iranian influence of the country, and now the Iranian government has a lot of influence inside Iraq, and now Iran, Iraq, Syria have an alliance, a triple alliance, 3-country alliance against Western powers. It's actually ended up worse for them compared to when they had Saddam Hussein in power, and they had Saddam invade Iran on their behalf. Now they have now they have a person hostile to the West in charge of Iraq. So it's actually It's unlike what the media makes it seem like, that it went from an anti-American dictator to a pro-American, democratically elected leader. It went from a pro-American dictator to a more democratic, anti-American guy. I'm not going to say democratic, but of course the whole governmental system was set in part by the United States a few years ago. However, then again, you could say that it's fallen apart completely. It's a new government at this point. That's the thing about Iraq, is that the stability is just not quite there, and it's hard to gauge what's going to happen to Iraq. Iraq's been now a country that's been shattered by years of war, and you're talking about a country that's faced 25 years of United States interference, United States invasion, the first one in 91, and then there was all these operations, and then you had all the way to the 2003 war, and now you've had the United States return in 2014. Now, the United States has been there 3 times in the last 25 years, and you have Blackwater all throughout the country now. And it's like Afghanistan. Afghanistan's not over, you know. People like to say that Iraq and Afghanistan are over. And, really people like to say Iraq's over. People like to think that Iraq's been over for 5 years, but actually Iraq's only the one combat operation in 2011. However, there's still continued fighting, and in fact, they're having more suicide bombings than ever inside of Iraq. There's no real mission accomplished. There's no real there's nothing really to be proud about when it comes to as an American what was done in our name over there in Iraq, what was done in our name, not just in Iraq but across the Middle East. And as we have Obama leaving here in a couple weeks, it should be remembered how many bombs were dropped across the Middle East. That ultimately he was involved with 7 wars. 3 more than George W. Bush was involved in. But yet you have the liberals in this country and the Democrats in this country shouting about how he was a peacemaking president when he wasn't. And the Iran deal that is seen as such a concession on our own part, and it's seen as such a it's such a mastered compromise in the eyes of a lot of Americans, is not, it's seen as a horribly unfair deal for the Iranians, because it was a pretty unfair deal for the Iranians. And Trump talk about this being an unfair deal for Americans is insane. We didn't get, they're saying that we're sending so much money over there to Iran, but what we have done in reality is that we've put Iran into a state where they have to be checked all the time, and it's a big breach on their sovereignty. And the sanctions we're supposed to drop because of the Iran deal is now the whole sanctions because of the Iran deal haven't been dropped. And we had all these negotiations over April. We had across July 2015, and they make it seem like it was like this master thing that was going to make both sides happy. I tell you one thing, is that the American government was definitely happier than the Iranian government walking away from that deal, because the American government, they ultimately have eliminated Iran's potential to self-defend, while Iran, all they got in return was practically no war for now. And it's similar to the type of deals that were given to Saddam in 2002 before the war happened, and ultimately the United States invaded. So they should take a lesson from Iraq to realize that just because that the United States is pretending like they're friendly now doesn't mean that they're going to not invade in a little bit. And they're not even acting really like they're friendly. When you don't even when you don't even honor your word, and you're given an agreement that pretty much says we're going to check you all the time now, and that for nuclear weaponry, we're not going to even allow you to do your own, determine your own future with how you defend your country. in a country in a region that has two nuclear powers in it. You have India, you have Pakistan, you have Israel, and Israel and Pakistan are both American allied. So you've got two countries that could easily, launch on you in the case of a serious event, and Israel that you have people that are just about psychopathic enough to launch on you, and you're going to tell me that Iran's not allowed to determine their own destiny on how they defend their own country. And it goes back to South America, and with all the different things that happen there between the potential. I feel like now they should be really preparing themselves for some kind of aggression, because Trump, I've talked about, is going to take the strong stance against South America, and I do believe it. I do believe that South America is in for it's got something coming for them. Some of these countries, and it's definitely going to be at the very minimum heavier sanctions. And throughout the last few years, we've had coup attempts, and we've had multiple things that have been to destabilize and sabotage the governments down there in Venezuela and Bolivia and multiple other countries. We've had this tightening on these countries. However, with Trump, I could imagine is that this is down the United States military machine cranking up a notch when it comes to Latin America, and potentially an invasion of one of these countries. And also, it would probably be done under the same guise of a humanitarian mission. But just remember that Venezuela remember the facts of that. Who got 43 people killed? Leopoldo Lopez. But who is the ones that were actually able to make over 1 million Venezuelans literate? Who are the ones that provided social housing all across the country? Who are the ones that reduced food prices where actually people could eat in these countries? And also, who are the ones that said that the workers could help decide economic policy? It was the Chavistas, and Maduro, it was Chavez, the Bolivian Revolution. Who are the ones that have been seen starting riots? The right-wing protesters, that they call them. A lot of them acted like terrorists. And that if these people are to come to power, just imagine the kind of way they're going to govern the country, like it was governed in the 80s in Venezuela with Andres Perez, is how I could imagine this new governmental system would act under, if Capriles was ever to take power or whatnot. And, it's disgusting to see people supporting people like Leopoldo Lopez on our media here in the United States, or seeing Capriles being supported. Capriles is just like a more moderate flavor of the same kind of fascism that comes from the Venezuelan right wing. And people like to make the charges about that supposedly Chavez is a dictator, that Maduro is a dictator, or that the supposed extreme measures that they said the Venezuelan government's taking. It seems to be like a headline every other day about how they've done this, they've done that, or whatnot. And a lot of it seems to be bullshit. And a lot of the so-called crisis that's happened inside of Venezuela has been heavily exaggerated in the media of the United States, and they're not really talking about the Colombian crisis that's also happening, that they have right now a crisis where food prices went up 8 times. It's like I was talking about, is that in countries allied with the United States, it seems to be that there's a serious problem with inflation happening in many of these countries: Canada, Ukraine, Mexico, Colombia. Colombia is one of those countries that's been affected by inflation, and they're one more country that's been affected by a worldwide crisis for American allies. And you have these countries' economies are starting to unravel as the petrodollar. It's like the brunt of the economic wrath is being pushed to America's allies for now, but eventually that's going to come to our shores, and it's going to affect American people. And I'll tell you one thing, is that it's going to affect American people, but it's not going to affect the bankers. Because the bankers, in the Great Depression, they weren't affected, but this time around, they won't be affected again. The thing is that the bankers they ultimately control the currency, so it doesn't really affect them when the crisis comes to their country. And the bankers inside the United States, a lot of them will just be bailed out. If their banks start to fail, like what happened in 2008, and with the bullshit to the bailouts. Remember that Bank of America got a huge bailout. You got these big bankers, receiving these bailouts while regular people are struggling. Regular people can't find a job. Regular people end up taking the brunt of economic crises, and that's the unfortunate reality. Of how under this economic system, what happens to average people. It's me, you, it's your neighbor. It's Wall Street doesn't get affected, but Main Street gets affected, and small businesses close down. That's what's probably bound to happen. Some kind of recession that'll be caused by this petrodollar unraveling, but it would actually be a depression. And the call, even though the first recession, is wrong, because it was a depression. This is the second depression. We've had really the 2008 to 2011 recession was a depression, and we're about to see another depression. But this time it's going to be worse than the one that we saw a few years ago, because this is going to be a total restructuring of the dollar is bound to happen. A lot of economists say so. Even though that on the surface it appears that our Dow is going up and we're having a lot of these economic indicators going up. However, that's only on the surface. You have to look past it. It's a smokescreen for the United States banker machine, and it fools a lot of Americans. They actually see that, and they actually take that as the reality. They think that they can gauge what our economic situation is just because they watch some TV show. They watch that one guy that tells you about what stocks to invest in or whatnot. Of course, it's not that simple. Inside of Venezuela, there's definitely been some problems, partially because the oil prices went down and their economy is largely based on oil. However, it's not as bad as the problems that we're seeing at the Carazaco, where people were starving in the 80s, and that's where we saw some real issues actually happen, and a lot of people survived that. Could tell you that. That happened 27 years ago it happened in February 1989, this is where the protests ended up, that were caused by the people starving, ended up in the government killing, and in some estimates, 3,000 Venezuelan people. Yes, 3,000 Venezuelans were killed during the Carazaco. It was an absolute horrible event. A lot of blood was shed, and it was one of the things that I think turned the Venezuelans against the right-wing government, and ultimately set the stage partially for the rise of Chavez. And Chavez, kind of rose to popularity by a coup that he attempted, and it was kind of a response to what happened in the Carazaco, which was in 1992. He attempted to overthrow the Venezuelan government. It was on February 4th, 1992. He was put in jail, and later on, after Andres Perez would be charged with corruption. I think after Andres Perez was charged with corruption, he was released. Then Caldera would be defeated in the election in 1998. Well, even at first, Chavez wasn't even, when he was released from prison, at first, like a year after, 2 years after, he wasn't talked about really running. He didn't think that he could win, but he ended up, because he thought it would be rigged, but he ended up winning. And in 1998, he won, became the president, and then many things started changing for Venezuela. And I'm going to give like a little bit of timeline of some of the recent events inside of Venezuela. And, you need to remember that in just the last few months, really, there's been this really tightening by the United States against Venezuela, which is like the core. It's like when you talk about what is like the heart of the revolution inside of South America is Venezuela. They were the first ones to do it, and they became the symbol of what the other countries could achieve to be. And Chavez came in '98, Kirchner came in '03, Lula in 2002. Lugo in 2008, it all started building with Chavez. And Latin America, it wasn't just in South America, but it was all across Latin America. They ended up having a change, a big movement that has been called Pink Tide. Pink Tide is this widespread revolution all across South America. From Dominican Republic to Chile, all many different countries. For example, in Chile, one of the major things that it should be noted about Chile is that they went from having Pinochet, the military dictator that the United States placed in, to now Bachelet, who the head of her party is Isabel Allende, the daughter of Salvador Allende. There's been some major changes in South America, and you have to look a little bit deeper sometimes to see them. But what has happened is that across the continent, there's been a extreme improval of the lives of the average person. There's been an extreme surge of hope inside the country, and it's like what Chavez once talked about in his last speech, is that he was saying that fire turned into a continent of that revolution. And it's something that is underappreciated in South America. And I think that if you watching some movies, one of the best movies I heard, about that talks about the Pink Tide, Sur de la Frontera, or South of the Border, and it talks about all the changes in these countries. And that was like filmed at the height of the revolution. Now that it's kind of, that's the thing, is that they really have put their attempts to try to quiet it, and then they've been successful in pushing it back somewhat. Brazil, one of the major countries, if I talk about the heart of the revolution, Venezuela, Ecuador, you could say is kind of like the second country, and then Brazil gone. Brazil was kind of a more moderate version of the Pink Tide government, but they were part of it. And Dilma had pretty good relations with Chavez, Mujica. And if Mujica sounds familiar, that's because he's known as the poorest president in the world. Mujica was known for driving around his Volkswagen Beetle and wearing normal clothes. Despite being the president of Uruguay, he decided to keep his humility and did not let the power go to his head. And I guess the part of the reason why he's so humble is because of the fact he spent 35 years in jail with the military dictatorship. That's right. That 35 years that he spent locked away. And 35 years behind bars. It's definitely going to change your perspective. And I think that's why Mujica acted the way he did as president. And I think that some people might ridicule him and make it seem like that he wasn't really taking the position seriously. But he did a very good job as president, and he legalized marijuana. That was one of the major things he did. And to do that in South America, that's a big step, because no one had done it in South America before. They have like decriminalization laws across the continent. However, to actually fully legalize and sell it like a normal plant, that's a whole different story. And there's only been a few countries in the world to legalize marijuana fully. An interesting story is that apparently North Korea is one of those countries. And Uruguay became one of them. A lot of the world has decriminalization laws, that they can't take you to jail for it, but they can write you a fine, which of course is a lot better than the United States, where you have stories of people selling $20 a pot and getting thrown away for life. You have no tolerance laws, and a lot of times if you already had a few prior convictions, and that could be the one that ultimately that non-crime can get you thrown away in prison for the rest of your life. And this isn't, these kind of things happen where people caught, this is the first thing they've ever done, caught selling a couple pounds of pot, thrown away for life. They get found with you get found with 21 grams in Florida as a felony. You know what happens once you become a felon is that your life becomes very hard. And that's the kind of laws we have here in America. But, at least in other countries, they tend to have decriminalization laws, which limits what the law can do to you. But ultimately, legalization is the preferred option. But only a few countries have that, and Mexico is one of the countries, one of the people to do that. And it wasn't like he's this, young guy that, it's like, yeah, man, let's smoke some dabs, bro. No, it wasn't like that. No, he was kind of an older guy. So that's probably what would seem a little bit odd to people from an outside perspective. Mojica's actually, he's getting up there. He's about, I think, 86 now. So he was president from 2010 to 2015. Now Tabaré Vázquez is the president of Uruguay again. He was before Mojica, which he still left leaning and allies himself with neighboring countries. However, I feel that across the continent is that the amount of radical nature of the movement is kind of dwindling. We still have Maduro, who's very strong ideologically, but you have, for example, in Bachelet, who's not really that strong ideologically. You have Morales, he's kind of more radical, and Morales, I think, has been one of the shining examples of the movement, and he's been there for 10 years, and they try to make a scandal out of his presidency. They try to make it seem like he's corrupt, but ultimately he's done a very good job, and he's also been the first native leader inside of South America, and in a country that's 55% native, that's a important thing. Before, under the dictatorships of before, they had no natives. They had years and years of oppression. And, Bolivia is actually the country where Che Guevara was captured. Che Guevara was captured. Who helped Che Guevara's capture happen? I'll give you a hint, is that this guy was from Europe. It was Klaus Barbie. People seem to forget that inconvenient fact that in 1967 the CIA worked with Klaus Barbie and eliminated Che Guevara. They ultimately executed him. And a man that, he said that, he's like, shoot me, you coward. I'm just a man, saying that, even though that you'll kill me, my ideology will live on. And Che Guevara was somebody that was really principled. And when he got killed, in a way, it did ultimately spark future revolution inside the country, or inside the region. Inside of Latin America, he became kind of a symbol for all of them in order to protest and stand up to their government. And I think that nowadays the spirit of Che will continue instead of Argentina, with Marcia Macri being eliminated with that same kind of vigor in their protest. And I'm going to look up, the coup attempt. There was in 2015, there was actually another coup attempt that happened inside of Venezuela, and it was thwarted in the earlier stages compared to in 2002, where it was thwarted in the very late stages, where Pedro Comano had actually been sworn in. The businessman almost became the president of Venezuela. Now he lives in Colombia. And that's one of the major things that is going to, of course, continue tension between Colombia and Venezuela. Colombia is controlled by the United States. they harbor a man that's responsible for a lot of bloodshed during the coup, and Carmona ultimately took power for 2 days, and then he fled on April 13th, 2002. It's kind of weird to think that it's already been this much time since the coup happened. The coup, ultimately, if anything, made the protests against the United States stronger, and it made the fury of the people and how fed up they were with the United States interference. It made that stronger. So it ultimately backfired, the coup, and they ultimately didn't actually get to keep Carmona in power, and Chavez remained in power for the rest of his life, which would be another 11 years. And now Maduro's been in power for almost 4 years. It's kind of hard to believe that Maduro has actually made it. It seemed that with all the things that happened, it seemed like he wasn't going to make it this far. I thought that there was a possibility that the government would switch out with somebody for Maduro, put in possibly Diosdado Cabellos in power, but I think that they're going to wait till 2019, and then Diosdado Cabellos could then be brought into power when the election happens. I think that Venezuela is a tricky situation, but at this point, Maduro, he's picked another vice president. Aristobullo Usturiz is gone. Even though he's a strong principal Chavista, I think that he wanted to pick somebody different to continue on during this crisis. And now he has, and actually an Arab has taken the place of vice president. And some say that he picked that guy so he wouldn't be recalled because the opposition hates him so much. The opposition, partially Zionist, probably doesn't like the idea of an Arab taking the charge of Venezuela, because one of the things that Venezuela has been about has been supporting the Palestinian rights, and I know that an Arab will probably fight for that. There's actually a few Arabs that live inside of Venezuela, and there's a couple apparently in their government. Tariq Saab is another one, who's kind of like a spokesman for Venezuela, and this guy, the new vice president, is Arab. And he's kind of a younger guy. He's been in the government for a little bit of time. The pick is interesting, but I don't think the Maduro administration is going to go into the next term. I don't think that Maduro is going to be the one that the PSUV picks to run in 2019 or 2018. The election is going to happen. I think that the PSUV is going to probably pick Diosdado Cabellos to run, and it would be a smart pick, because this is the man that they was for a long time seen the success of the Chavez, and the pick of Maduro was kind of not expected. Because Maduro, it's not that Maduro's corrupt or anything like that, but his qualification wasn't quite there. Maduro had only been the vice president for a few months before he was brought in as president. Chavez died in March 5th, 2013, not long after the term started, January 10th, and Maduro was the president in March. And now that Maduro's been there quite a bit of time, I think in some ways that this crisis could have been somewhat alleviated with Cabellos in charge. It made Cabellos, would have been able to rally some more morale into the country. That's part of the thing, is that Maduro can't get that morale that Chavez was able to get. Chavez got through Venezuela through some tough times, but Diosdado Cabellos could also do that. Maduro, not quite so much. He just doesn't have the charisma that Chavez had. Chavez had charisma. It's a very important thing for a leader to have. Chavez could rally the people through tough times. Maduro, not so much. Chavez was able to kind of mend the country back together after the coup, a very divisive time for Venezuela. Think about that. Is that there was a lot of people that did march against Chavez and have been duped by the media, and it wasn't like the media was pro-Chavez at the time. The media was almost all pro-opposition, at the time of the coup, and it's a little bit better nowadays, but it's still like 60% opposition, 40% government. The opposition still controls a ton of the media in the country, and it's to no surprise. Think about it. You know, the Zionists have a lot of influence on our media in our country. The Zionists have somewhat of influence in the media inside of Venezuela, and I think that's part of the problem with the revolution, is that it didn't go far enough. The revolution should have done more measures in order to eliminate these parasites out of the media, and these parasites that feed on ignorance of people, and then they put in their phony beliefs and turns people into the kind of people that will do like these actions like we've seen in the recent years against the Bolivian government. And I mean, it's went as far as that the opposition will snipe their own people and say the government did it. We've seen very extreme measures being taken by the opposition, and now they seem to be getting even more desperate. And now you have the potential of a military coup again happening in the country, but the military seems to be 100% behind Maduro, which is a good thing. It would have to be elements that are not seen as currently being pro-Maduro, is not currently being seen as being anti-Maduro in order to start some kind of coup. There's been also a listing of Venezuela as a national threat to the United States, and this is just another thing that shows to the level of the desperateness of the United States government to want to eliminate the government inside of Venezuela, because ultimately they're no threat to the United States. Is that the Venezuelan government is not going to attack the United States. They're not going to sabotage the United States. They're not going to do the kind of things that the United States government did to them. The Venezuelan government does not have an interest in starting some kind of military affair that they cannot win. And Venezuela knows that if they were to even attack, American interest, that it would end up in the potential elimination of their country. If they were to invade Colombia or something like that, the United States would come in to back Colombia. So Venezuela knows they can't take on the United States government. The coup in 2002 was very close to coming into fruition. However, it fell short at the very end due to the people's support of the Bolivian government. They don't seem to talk about that event very much in our news, but they would mention that 1 million Chavistas were coming. I don't know the exact number, but it was 1 million Chavistas were coming to back Chavez and welcome him back to the palace when he came into the helicopter in practically the middle of the night it was April 13th, 2012. It was a very short-lived coup, the 2002 coup against Chavez. A lot of the poor people inside of Venezuela came out to support Hugo Chavez. It was a scene of the people's will going against the United States policymakers, and what almost became one of the big successes of the United States government in a long time in thwarting the democracy of a South American country. By the way, if you want to chip into this conversation, you can by calling in at 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. This is UCY Radio here with Voice of Rebellion Radio. They were able to successfully do this in 1973 with the coup attempt in Chile, but they were not successful this time. And in 1973, part of the reason was because it was a total military defection. A lot of the military abandoned Allende, and Allende was ultimately had not many options. However, with Chavez, a lot of the military came to support Chavez, and I think that in Venezuela it's a little bit different, is that there seems to be a culture of the military being left-leaning compared to, for example, in the United States, the military being right-leaning. But I'm talking more, it's more like the people of the United States, like the military people seem to lean more right-wing in their beliefs. A lot of them, but I think that after being there a while, they changed their mindset, and after they've seen the ugliness of war, they're no longer backing the neocons wars. They're no longer backing genocide. You know, veterans seem to be some of the most vocal and fervent critics of the United States government. And that's why I think partially there seems to be this push to kind of demonize veterans when it comes to, they try to make veterans seem like they're mentally unstable. They try to make veterans seem like they're aggressive. And unfortunately, a lot of them have become mentally ill due to seeing the horrors of war. They have post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's sad how the veterans are not taken care of when they come home, when they believe that they were going to do that they were prepared to take the ultimate sacrifice for the United States, but in reality they were just doing the bidding of the bankers and Wall Street. And it's like what Smedley Butler talked about, that he spent 33 years in being in the military, and he was just pretty much a thug for the gangster class of America, and the gangster class being Wall Street. You know, is that he even said that I could have gave Al Capone a few pointers. Smedley Butler is a really interesting character if you want to read about the reality of the United States military machine. And he was talking about this stuff a long time ago, back in the 1930s. You know, and you still see that it's still relevant today, because at that point it was already being built. The United States became the muscle for bankers around the world in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was built, and on December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve became a working entity, and then our country was sold off to the bankers. And then guess what? We get involved in World War I, a war that we had no part in, based on a false flag. It was really like the first major false flag. Well, there was the Maine, but the Lusitania, the people knew, the people that let that ship go out to sea, they knew that there was a German threat, and also the British knew where the German submarines were, didn't tell them, and who was also one of the people that was high up in the Navy in World War I? Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill probably had a role himself in having the Lusitania sunk, and then get the United States involved in a war that Britain had a big part in, but the United States had no part in it. And Lusitania wasn't really the thing that got us into the war. It was ultimately the Zimmerman telegram, which sounds very fishy, and almost sounds like the Russians hacking elections thing, doesn't it? Is that, oh yeah, we got a telegram saying that they were trying to cooperate with Mexico into invading the country, or it sounds like Saddam has WMD, so it probably wasn't even any bit truthful. And they ultimately turned it down in the long run. So what was the big deal? Why would we get involved in a war all the way over there over something that didn't even happen to us? You know, it's like it's not like they actually agreed to it and invaded our country. Then it'd be different. Then we would have a role in the war. But we didn't have a role in that war. But you know what role we did? Who had a role in the war? The bankers. So they dragged us in there, and the bankers got us into World War I. And they would ultimately, later on, they would get us into the Korea War. They would get us into Vietnam. They would get us into Grenada. They would get us into doing their bidding so many times, and Americans would be killed to do their bidding. And also, a lot of innocent people in the countries that they invaded would be killed. In every instance, so many innocent people were killed. Iraq, in the Iraq 91 war, and you had these people exposed a lot of times. These soldiers that were exposed to horrible things during these wars, and then later on weren't even taken care of when they got home. The Iraq 91 war, they were exposed to that fucking shit that led to the Gulf War syndrome. The Iraq war, you had what happened at Fallujah, and ultimately I'm sure that a lot of people were exposed to the they were exposed to the depleted uranium. It's a lot of, if you look at the history of the United States military invasions, you see a lot of wars that we had no part in. The only one that was, you could say, was any bit justifiable was World War II. And then there's the talk that FDR knew ahead of time about the Pearl Harbor bombing. And ultimately, what did the Allies, or really talk about Britain, what did they end up doing when they got to Europe? Yes, the Nazis ended up losing the war, but ultimately, Dresden got absolutely obliterated. And one of the most horrible things that happened during the war was the fact that all those Nazis practically ended up coming to, a lot of them came to the United States. There was Operation Paperclip, including Adolf Hussinger, the Nazi chief of staff, ended up coming to the United States and becoming the NATO chief of staff by 1964. So a lot of these horrible criminals that did a lot of the horrible things during World War II ended up getting help from the United States government after the war. And then you had, for example, and then you had another thing that happened after the war was the creation of Israel, using the deaths of the people in the Holocaust as, they politicized that and turned that into a justification to make this murderous state and chase out people and do a lot of the same crimes that were committed in the Holocaust inside of Palestine. I know it sounds like I'm getting worked up, but these are the facts. What the United States and we'll talk about Britain. What Britain did in World War II was not heroic. By what happened in Dresden, you could say that Britain's war efforts, and what Churchill was responsible for, was horrific. And when you look at Britain, of course, it's a country that pays their taxes to the Rothschilds. Britain is controlled by the Rothschilds. So, of course, they were just doing their bidding during the war. But I have to say this to anyone that's even considering becoming a soldier, joining the United States military, is that if you are thinking about doing it, just remember that you'll be doing their bidding. And they'll get us in that we have no place in Iraq, we have no place in Syria. If we do have a place in Syria, it is defeating ISIS, but we're not doing that. What the United States government is doing is helping ISIS. And there's all the evidence in the world. Just go online and fucking look it up. It's all over the place. But no, apparently people want to be blind to the facts. Is that obviously there's a unlimited amount of proof on this. And also I'll tell you one thing, is that if the United States military, if you're thinking about going to the United States military and you're going to go into Venezuela, or you're going to go into South America, and you think you're going to touch South America, and you think you're going to impose your will on them, I'll tell you one thing, is that they're not a bunch of cowards out there. They are going to fight back, and they are going to bring some ass whooping. People of Venezuela are very tough, and they've been through a lot. And I'll tell you one thing, is that the United States military goes in there trying to do regime change, that the soldiers that are there that have been unfortunately put up to that task are going to face a real backlash, because they're not going to go back that easily to the pre-98 government, where they suffered so bad for many years. You had these slums in Caracas, people starving, people being oppressed by the right-wing government. And when I talk about the slums, one of the things that comes to mind is the big towers, these slum towers used to tower over Caracas, that ultimately got torn down in the end after many years of progress of Bolivian revolution. But the slums of Caracas that were there, the horrors of poverty, the horrors of struggle that these people went through, they're not going to go back to that so easily. So that if you're thinking about being in the United States military, and that's one of the things that you think you're going to be able to do, I'll tell you one thing, that it's going to be very tough. It's a shame that people, they've got Americans so brainwashed into thinking that our government's so bad, and to think that the Venezuelan people are being oppressed now, when that was the case before, and that's what the United States military is trying, what would be trying to do if they ever did invade Venezuela. And even though there's not Chavez, I remember what Bush said about talk about against the Iraq invasion, that he'll be waiting at Savannah if Bush ever got the crazy idea of invading. I wish I could play like sound clips or stuff like that, because you could actually hear him talk about that. Especially for Spanish listeners, could hear him talking about in his words about the Iraq invasion. But that's one where he says, "You are a donkey, Mr. Bush." Yeah, that was that incident, which was infamous. I wouldn't say infamous. It was famous. It was great, honestly. And, finally put Bush in his place. But I would say that Bush was somebody that, when he was in power, belongs to a very maligned family, and of course he was just a puppet. So I think that we need to focus a little bit more on the people that are behind these puppets. Rather, we can talk a lot of shit about Obama, we can talk a lot of shit about Bush. It's fun, but ultimately you have to realize that they have less power than seen on the surface. Of course, they have some power. I think they what power they do have. They have the power to resist the orders if they wanted to, but they don't. They could do like JFK, and they could use their presidential power to resist the powers that be and actually do something productive. But they do destructive actions by just following the orders of the bankers, the people at the top. But Bush. I think when Chavez described, I think Chavez describing Bush as more as I think a donkey. I mean, that's an insult to donkeys. I mean, I don't know. It's more like a parasitic worm would be a better comparison for Bush, or something straight out of hell would be something better for Bush to describe him as. Because that dude was, straight evil. Well, what he did was straight evil. What happened in his administration? This is a better way to say it. What happened in his administration was straight evil. Of course, that he probably didn't have a lot of say in what happened. The Iraq War killed 1.8 million Iraqis. What happened at Hurricane Katrina, where we had these people were so neglected by the United States government after it happened, and then the whole taking care of that was terrible. So many different things that, and for people that were born in the 90s, it's the first presidency we really remember, and we remember that it was the scandals of all that government, and I don't see how people have much faith in the government, as much as this young generation does, when they remember the scandals of the Bush government. But I guess is that they think that everything was somehow fixed with the Obama government. And now we're going to the Trump government. I see some optimistic, a lot of them very pessimistic. A lot of the young generation seems like they're only upset when there's a Republican in power. And, there's all of a sudden protests start happening, and all of a sudden people actually get involved when a Republican's in power. But you think that, it's like they say with a lot of people in Generation X, is that a lot of them didn't have faith in the government because one of the earlier governments they can remember was Nixon, and remember all the scandals and all the lying that happened under his administration. So you think, so they ultimately ended up being very skeptical and cynical of government for their entire lives. You'd think that it would be the same effect with this current generation. The end of the millennials, really it is, because they say the millennials started in the early 80s. So it was just I feel like it's kind of a weird way to describe that, because it doesn't seem like people that were born in the early 80s are the same as the people that are born, in the late 90s. Like they say that the millennials belong to go from 81 to 99 or something like that. And now we having this, I guess, somewhat of a transferring of a new generation coming about, which unfortunately they a lot of them have been born in this digital age where it seems like even though there's this amount of information, the wisdom's not there. And it seems like before, it's kind of weird. It's like back in the 50s and back in the people that were born back in the 50s and 60s, that they were very cynical and they used a lot of common sense when it came to how they viewed the government. But people nowadays don't use common sense, and there's all this information out there, and they believe a lot of disinfo. They believe the CNN. They believe the Fox News, and with that little amount of common sense, it's very detrimental to their amount to what they know about the world, and they have this very skewed view of the world, and you have people actually believing, for example, that Vladimir Putin is somehow this kind of puppet master that's able to influence the American elections, and is the one that's going to be now responsible for our government being fucked up for the next few years. They're going to actually believe that. It's weird. It's how they've been able to flip that, isn't it? That they've been able to change it from their government sucks and our government's great to our government sucks because their government sucks and their government's controlling our government. That's the lie that's going to be pushed on the news for the next few years, I guess. Or I feel like that's going to drop out of the news soon, though. Because what's their end game with that? Are they going to invade Russia? They're not going to invade Russia. They can't take on Russia. And it's like what Ollie Richardson was talking about 2 weeks ago, is that Russia has a lot of new equipment while our stuff is failing. But, I feel like he was a little bit wrong in not taking account the amount of secret stuff that the United States government does. So I'm going to actually say that they probably could, because there's probably a lot of secret stuff we don't know about. But just remember that they don't want to take them on because it's a war that wouldn't be very easily winnable for them. They feel like they can take on Iran because of it's a smaller country and that the military isn't quite at the same level as the United States military, or that's what they believe. I'm not saying that it actually is. I think that they would be at the same level as the United States military because they would have the territorial advantage, and I think the Iranian military, the people are very passionate. Very patriotic people, the Iranians. It's something that the Iraqi military didn't have. So, the Iraqi military might have been the fourth biggest military in the world, but why they crumbled against the United States military was their lack of morale. They had practically no morale, and they were not taken care of by Saddam's government. They had not enough clothes, they didn't have enough equipment, and it's much different with Iran. Iran, they have sufficient stuff. It's just the question is do they have enough forces in order to take on the United States military? Again, the call-in number, if anybody wants to get involved in this conversation, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Here at UCY Radio, this is Voice of Rebellion Radio, and we are talking about Pink Tide and the South American Revolution. This Pink Tide, what it has to do with the Middle East is that a lot of them made better relations with Iran, and I think that this mending of ties between Latin America and Iran, that it really does irk the Zionists. It's the third world working together, and it's like what Tito talked about with the non-aligned movement, is the smaller countries working together. Back then it was against both blocs, the Soviet Union and the United States. Nowadays, it's just really the focus is against the New World Order, which is the United States, UK, Israel, these countries. It's really like now it's more obvious, I guess, all who's working with them. Compared to back then, it was kind of skewed because you had the Soviets and the United States. It appeared to be two different powers working against each other. But if you look at it, the Soviets acted in many ways like how the United States acted. So Tito wanted to make something separate. He wanted to make a third pole, but how Putin described it is about it's about the multipolar world, and the people on the other pole want everything to be under their pole. They want the New World Order. They want a unipolar source of power. Putin doesn't want that. Putin wants a multipolar world. And Putin's talked about against the New World Order in terms that don't usually involve using the word New World Order, but it's very apparent that he does not approve of the New World Order plans and doesn't seem to be on the same side of the Rothschild, Soros, and all them. In South America, a lot of them have moved against the unipolar world and have now taken steps to free themselves economically. And one of the big things that South America has been able to do, I think, was work on the UNISOR project. That was one of the biggest accomplishments that Chavez was reaching, was UNISOR. But UNISOR fell apart. It didn't fall apart, but that's actually not right. It stalled somewhat, and it was supposed to be a working body, I think, sooner time than it is nowadays, partially because Brazil, Argentina, and other countries have backed away from Pink Tide. You have Paraguay's out. Paraguay, who Lugo was overthrown a parliamentary coup when he was sick with cancer. Like a lot of these leaders got sick with cancer. And there's a lot of rumors about that there might have been a cancer weapon that was used against all these different leaders. There's investigations still going on to this day about what happened to Chavez in reality. That Chavez was poisoned. And it's been almost 4 years since Chavez was poisoned, and or might have been poisoned since he died. And the investigation still hasn't came to an end. But I'm sure that one day they might be very much like Arafat, that they find out that there's a lot of evidence that he was poisoned. By the way, Lugo, the former president, he's still a senator to this day. He returned to the Paraguayan government in 2013. Now he's a senator, but he was impeached in a parliamentary coup in the summer of 2012. The date exactly was June 22nd, 2012. He was impeached. So it's been a while now. It's kind of weird. It's been that long since he was overthrown. Dilma Rousseff proposed suspending Paraguay's membership in Mercosur when this happened. Cristina Kirchner, Rafael Correa, Leonel Fernandez, who was the president of the Dominican Republic, said they would not recognize Franco as president. I guess Franco was the active president at the time. And even Colombia and Chile were not for the removal of him. So that's just stuff to consider. And some people said that Lugo's removal was similar to when Manuel Zelaya, the guy that was overthrown at gunpoint in Honduras, was overthrown in 2009. So it wasn't just like some of the supporters said it was legal and constitutional, but a lot of people said it was a coup. Not just people from the left wing of South America labeled that as a coup. And then in 2013 election to replace his interim presidential replacement, Lugo ran as a Senate candidate, and he was elected to the Paraguayan Senate representing the left-wing coalition Frente Iguaçu. But Lugo's still, he's only 65 years old. I think he could run again in 2018 and potentially come back to power. It'd be interesting to see him come back, and it would be very beneficial. Somewhat Paraguay is like in the kind of like the central South America, so it's kind of like refill a hole inside of South America now that the right wing has taken over.
Brazil, I think Lula has a good chance of defeating Temer in 2018, just for the fact that Temer is really disliked. I mean, he very quickly became heavily disliked man inside of Brazil, and they talked about how there was this wide support for the overthrow Dilma, but I don't think this was quite true. Dilma Rousseff, it was true that she had some criticism against her, and it was like Maduro. There was some criticism against Maduro. However, I don't think that the wide majority of the country wanted Dilma gone. I don't think the wide majority wants Maduro gone. Maduro, there was this poll, and you have to question polls because there was those polls that said for a long time the Brexit wasn't going to happen, and Maduro, there was apparently some poll that was taken that said like 88% of likely voters would want Maduro ousted from power. You have to really question when who took that poll, because if that was true, I feel like that was what they were able to achieve in 2002. They would have overthrown Maduro if that was really the people's will, which is not. The people's will is to keep Maduro in or the PSUV in. Maybe they don't like Maduro so much. Maybe Maduro's not liked by 60%, 70% of the country. But they definitely, I think the PSUV has a lot higher support, and I think Diosdado Cabello has a very high support inside the country. And I think that if he was to come in, he could definitely enjoy about a 55 to 60% support. And I think that, especially if he could fix some of the same mistakes of Maduro, Diosdado Cabello would do very well. It was and it's funny that the Venezuelan opposition said that Maduro's government staged a coup, even though that they've been involved with, they've been the ones that pretty much have been chanting on a coup against Maduro. Is that they will dare say that the Venezuelan left-wing government has been the ones that staged a coup. They didn't, and they've actually enjoyed many elections, and their role in the National Assembly has been heavily reduced, which is scary because it's kind of like when Salvador Allende, he had faced a lot of opposition from the parliament in his country, and then ultimately he gets overthrown. It scares me to think that potentially some kind of, the roaring could start from the National Assembly and then lead to the overthrow of Maduro from there. They have the numbers inside the National Assembly to overthrow Maduro because 3 people were brought in illegally, and yes, I'll say illegally, to power. The people voted. These people were disqualified, these 3 before, so they didn't have a basis to run on, but they ended up going through the election, and they ended up taking the seats in the long run. See, I'm looking right now at the this right here, the Venezuelan government's in the coup that supposedly, because they squashed their referendum for the recall. That's what the basis of calling on the coup was based on. But it ultimately is not a coup, and they ultimately just are sore losers. It's funny that the people that were screaming inside the United States when Trump was selected, the Trump supporters, screaming about how the rioters or whatever should just get over it. That's what Venezuela's facing over there. It's a lot different, but the fact is that the Venezuelan left is dealing with a lot of sore losers on the right wing. Can't accept that they lost. They can't accept they lost the 2013 election. In 2013, it was a very narrow election, but it was still clearly a Maduro victory. And Capriles, wouldn't accept the result, and he cried about it and whatnot, and he talked about how it's so unfair and how corrupt the Venezuelan system is or whatnot. But Capriles is just a poster boy for the United States imperialism. Capriles comes in, it's going to be like Andres Perez all over again, and it's you see the results. It's like people will say, "Oh, you're over exaggerating." It's like, well, look at what happened. Kirchner leaves in Argentina, and then Marcelo Macri takes over, and it's like they've reverted back to the 80s military big dictatorship time instead of Argentina. Okay, Brazil. Pretty much a similar situation. They went back to the times of Guaido and the other dictators that used to run the country back in the 60s and 70s after Rousseff was thrown out and not Maduro, I got the names mixed up, and Temer took over. And you see, and you're going to probably start to see in Peru a little bit of that with Kuczynski. He hasn't been in there a long time, but now it's going to start. Now that it's went from Humala to Kuczynski, I'm sure that there's going to be some noticeable changes in not too long. The election only happened in April. Actually, I think it was in June. It was the second round. That was the first round of the election. And they had a left-wing-leaning candidate in there, Victoria Mendoza, but I think she came in third place, so she didn't make it to the runoff election. That was like in June, and Kuczynski was elected. It was Keiko Fujimori versus Kuczynski for the runoff election, and ultimately Kuczynski won and became the Peruvian president. Kuczynski, a man that had worked with the World Bank and all kinds of, and the IMF and all kinds of connections to people. Of course, he's the one that's going to be that they're going to bring in there, in order to heavily influence that country and to revert the progress made under Pink Smoke. And looking at the articles, it seems like that definitely that they're very close to a coup inside of Venezuela. It seems like the tension's building up. However, it seems like they've lasted longer than some of these articles, that were a few months ago. We're talking about a coup happening. They didn't end up happening. If you want a good source of what goes on down in Latin America, so to check out his grandma is the it's from Cuba. It's the Communist Party instead of Cuba runs it, but it is pretty cool because you get to see you get to see a little bit different perspective from Latin America. And remember Fidel Castro actually talked about the Bilderberg Committee and talked about the shit show that was. So the people that say that Fidel Castro and the communists inside of South America didn't oppose the New World Order, well, I think you should take that into perspective, and I think that you've been fooled. Fidel Castro, he's talked about also Israel and ISIS working together and stuff like that. Fidel Castro had a lot of bold statements that he made about what's going on in the world, and people seem to not really take him seriously because they see him as the crazed, bearded dictator. But Castro, actually, how I see him, he was a patriot that stood up for his country and stood up to the bankers and protected Cuba from being controlled by the Rothschilds, and for a long time was an island, figuratively, of the from right-wing influence, and then was also an island, literally. Cuba has been pretty much been kept safe from the United States influence, and despite all their many attempts to try to sabotage that country, they weren't successful. And I'm looking right now at this article, and the recall referendum was rejected because it wouldn't happen in 2016, is what they said, because the errors that the Venezuelan opposition committed. Rodriguez said the Venezuelan armed forces remained loyal to the Constitution, the democratically elected government, and this is what one of the PSCV lawmakers says, that today we're going to hear everything the right wing's reality show. This is back when there was, it got kind of tense in October between the Venezuelan opposition, the Venezuelan left wing, and it ultimately ended up not going anywhere because obviously they're still in power right now. The Chavistas, and the Chavistas are going to stay in power for a while. I don't see them leaving power for. So I do get worried about the 2018 election because I feel like that can possibly go the way that the Argentine election did in 2015. But I mean, I think that they'll be able to rally and somewhat mend some of the divisions of the country before that, and they'll be able to fix. I think they'll be able to someone fix the image of the Latin American left by that time, and actually. And actually get some more fervent passion for the party. And there's been, they continue. They'll be the right wing will continue, whether it's they'll be continue trying to, be sneaky about it and try to do it by the parliament inside of Venezuela and try to eliminate Maduro in a way that's not, in a way that doesn't seem violent, in a way that doesn't seem to be a militaristic fashion, or they might try to do it via violent street attacks and intimidating the people inside the country until they give up. They think they'll be able to break down the left-wing supporters inside the country. Might be able to also, have people have the mentality if you can't beat them, join them. But that's not going to happen. And I can tell you that the people inside of Venezuela, they've been through a lot, and this continuation of what's been going on, nothing really to worry about. Remember that they've had some of their officials get assassinated. They've had a lot of stuff happen recently. And the right wing is the hidden side of the right wing inside of Venezuela. Like, while they champion them out to be freedom fighters here in our American media, they try to make it seem like these people are equivalent to like the people that fought against the apartheid regime in South Africa. They're obviously not. And there's been, also attacks on police officers there. A lot of stuff's happened. And there was a big march, I remember, in 2016 that didn't really go anywhere. In fact, this is a thing that the right wing brings out 100, the Chavistas bring out 10,000. It's is that maybe they bring out 100, Chavistas bring out 1,000, but the Chavistas still can match the right wing can't match the Chavistas' passion, because a lot of I think part of the problem is that a lot of the Chavistas they probably don't even vote, and that's probably why it doesn't reflect in some of the polls, but definitely on the streets, the Chavistas still have the streets, and even though they don't have the National Assembly, they have the presidency, they have the streets, and they have the militias on their side, and the military's on their side. And also they have a lot of the middle class on their side. Yeah, there was a national strike that was going to happen. There was a march to Miraflores Cars on November 3rd. I don't know if that's the one event that I was thinking of, but seems similar. We're about 15 minutes left of the show. Again, if you want to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. If we don't get a call in a few minutes, I'll probably just end up reading Mace Chavez speech or something you can find online. And, so you can actually, I wish I could bring the sound clips, like I said, so you can actually hear what Chavez had to say in his own words, about some of these, about Bush or whatever. Chavez is really entertaining to actually hear his speeches. I mean, that's just a way like I could pass time, just listen to a Chavez speech or whatnot and hear his passion. You definitely get you riled up. And if you know Spanish, you can really, really enjoyable, his speeches. And it wasn't the only one, there was, I would say, many of the Latin American leaders, Fidel Castro, he had a very good oratory skills, and he was known for that. He was known for being able to keep people's attention for 8 hours at a time. And then Chavez would also do very long addresses like that. He would do like 8 hours, on his show Allo Presidente, which is another thing to check out, if you got the time. He would talk on there for like 8 hours. It would be on Sunday morning. It would come on like 10 in the morning. And yeah, I was the thing. They actually took a lot of time to actually address the Venezuelan people, and he would actually call. He would take calls from people, and they would talk about whatever specific grievance or whatever, or a voice of support, And Chavez would actually talk to these people, these regular people calling into his show. I wonder if he screened people. Then that might have happened, but and I would say a lot of more voices of support, I would think, than people with problems, because he's loved by his people. Compared to Al Santos, in his image in Colombia, people do not like Santos. And that's like comparable because it's the neighboring country, and the two countries are very similar. And you see the tale between these two different, the tale between two countries, and you see Colombia on one hand struggling, food crisis, inflation, and Venezuela. They have a few of the things, but it's definitely been mitigated by the fact of how their system's set up compared to the Santos and the privatization. So it's like I said, the tale between two countries, in Colombia and Venezuela. Colombia is definitely, I think that it's much worse over there. You have abstract poverty, about 20, I think it's like a 27% of poverty, 55%. I think in Venezuela they've had the second biggest poverty reduction in the region, and of course they've also had a significant reduction in illiteracy. And I don't think that the Pink Tide movement's anywhere close to dead. I think that the Pink Tide movement's going to continue, and I think it's going to reignite the next few years. And I think that by 2020, especially with the Trump presidency, I think that Trump, similar to like Bush, is going to alienate the United States and Latin America further, and I think that it's going to potentially spark a lot more energy against the United States in Latin America compared to Obama. I think that some of the Latin America felt a little bit more cozier with the United States when, as the people, they felt that the United States was a little bit less threatening because they had this kinder face to imperialism, as they saw it. However, there's just another crazed psychopath, just like Bush was Obama, and then we have another one, Trump. It's kind of weird. Is that during the Bush administration, some say that he had a little bit cozier relationships with Europe than Obama did with Europe. and now that Trump's supposed to apparently to be a little bit of a kinder face to Europe than compared to Obama, and then like Obama was a little bit more kinder face to Latin America than Bush. But ultimately, you see the game that's played, and it's still the same military machine behind it. It's ultimately a big show, and that's what it seems like the Trump presidency is. It's a show, isn't it? It's not much more than that. You end up having this cabinet of billionaires and all kinds of other, it's practically a cabinet of oligarchs, and it's a government for the rich, by the rich, and fights for the rich. Now the surface is going to be seen that way. It's always been that way. But it's not going to be. Now the secret's no longer as concealed as it has been before. I feel like before that when we had, we've, for example, under LBJ or whatever, LBJ tried to act like he was someone who was fighting for the poor. Obviously he wasn't. He was a despicable human being that ultimately ended up in with the, you saw what happened in the USS Liberty incident, and you also see how he escalated the Vietnam War. There was nothing to be proud of when it came to LBJ, but that's how they do that. They change. That's how they do. Is that they put these kinder faces at times to try to attract certain people, try to ease the image to certain people when they damage the image of the government to that certain demographic too much. And looking right now at certain articles, I think Guatemala. I remember that the people of Guatemala were protesting about 2 years ago. A corrupt, pro-American guy was brought about. That was put in there, I think, by kind of like a coup not that long before that, and it was kind of like what they call like a Guatemala Spring. That's what was happening back in 2015. So that's what I would say. There's been recent developments where it seems that the last wing of the countries came out. It's not like it's all been bad the last few years inside of the Latin American left, but there's been some major pushback, and with sanctions, and with sabotage, and with many other things that what's happened. It's been in this whole put in these bullshit corruption charges or whatever. When the corruption should be talked about is Temer and what he's done inside of Brazil, or what Marcia Macri is doing in Argentina, or what has taken place under Santos in Colombia. Santos has acted in also the whole Uribe circle, what they've done to Colombia, and have allowed paramilitary and drug traffickers to run wild through that country because they're in bed with them. That's right. Paramilitary, it's very well known at this point that the paramilitary and the Uribe government worked hand in hand, but I would say that they also worked hand in hand with the Santos government. It's not like Santos doesn't belong to the same Uribe circle that Uribe belonged to. Uribe actually was kind of like a mentor to Santos, I would say. Uribe and Santos used to be friends, and then they tried to act like they were kind of split apart or whatever, and that that he was somewhat of a different ideology. But Santos he was kind of more of a kinder face to the horribly corrupt policies of Colombia during the 2000s under Uribe. And Uribe's very close relationship with Bush, and you see Uribe was one of the first people to reach out to Donald Trump after his election. And that was kind of like one of the first major indicators to me that Trump was not going to be any different than previous presidents. That you have Uribe, that scumbag, reaching out to Donald Trump and showing his support for Donald Trump. And I think Uribe and Santos actually are about similar in age, so I wouldn't necessarily call. I mean, but in a way, Uribe is like the master of the corruption, and he was the mentor to teach the Padawan Santos his ways, the dark side of politics. And looking at that, the vice president did step down. That was in Guatemala. Rosana Baldetti was the first to step down on May 8th, 2015. In Guatemala Supreme Court on June 10th accepted a petition to allow Congress to decide whether to revoke President Molina's immunity from prosecution for whatever possible acts in corruption. And this is kind of an old article. But Molina said he wouldn't resign at the time. I think it was the ultimate outcome of that. It was all that went on in South America. That's kind of one thing that kind of fell on the back burner of what happened there, because there's been a lot of other things happening. With Argentina, what's happened inside of Peru, many other countries. But we're in the last 2 minutes of the show here. We're about to be at 10:58. We're going to be we're going to hit the bumper, and actually it's 10:59. But to everyone that's out there listening to the show, definitely share it later. This show will be on YouTube in about 30-something minutes. It comes up the link. So if you got the opportunity, share it on Facebook, share it with your friends, and definitely next week. Not going to say anything too much yet, but I think we might have a guest next week, and that would be really cool to finally. I said finally, like we haven't had a guest in a while, but we'll have another one. We went a long time without having a guest, and we had Ollie Richardson come on a couple weeks ago, but we haven't had too many guests in a while. I mean, we had Tom Lockevar Stewart was the last one all the way up till December, and to be the first guest in 2017, looks like that we might have one next week, and it'll be pretty interesting. So definitely, if you have me on Facebook, watch for that. There'll be something I'll post about when if I get news that's actually happening. And also, if you haven't checked out my Facebook page yet, Chris Jackson Rojas, definitely subscribe. I don't really accept new friend requests. I mean, if you're really cool, I might accept you. But I have so many people on there is that I really feel like if you lose what people are talking about when you have too many friends on there. You start just not seeing people's posts, and I kind of just rather have people subscribe, follow the page or whatnot, and I can still, if you're following, I can still message you. It's not like I can't message you if you're following the page. So yeah, definitely do that. Subscribe, or yeah, I said subscribe. That's a YouTube term. It's follow. Yeah.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. My name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then